bonsoir à tous.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for being here. There are a lot of you in the room despite the heat, so well done. Things will go better as the evening goes along. Yes, we've got a very tricky job ahead of us. We've got to make the world desirable. To do this, we've got a wonderful panel to address all of the questions you're wondering about. So we have got Estelle Bachenloff from Veolia, Jean-Pierre Clamadieu from Engie. We've got Eric Lombard, General Manager of Caisse des Dépôts, and Florent Ménageux from Michelin. And we've got the Mayor of Florence with us, Dario Nardella. So welcome to everybody. Our coordinator is Yann Algan, and I'm going to hand the floor to him immediately to introduce this round table on the desirability of our future. Off you go, Yann. Hello. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We really are delighted to see so many of you here and so delighted to have this prestigious panel with us. To talk about making our world more desirable, I would allow myself to quote Daniel Cohen, who wrote a book called The World is Closed, but Desire Infinite. Well, that's the translation of the French title anyway. So economic growth is the religion of the modern world. Does that soothe conflicts? The promise is indefinite, and the promises of dramas every day is to wish what we do not have. In other words, growth was the solution to the anthropological state of the world, and desire was infinite. So having set the stage, how can we reconcile our infinite desires in a closed world, in a world where there is no planet B, and in a world where the most important thing is to protect living life, biodiversity, and our planet? And above all, how can we implement all of the different policies, including all of the different players? We've got businesses, we've got public policy, we've got state and citizens, and we are very fortunate to have the most eminent people of those three groups, businesses, civil society, and public policy, at this round table. So we will wonder whether technological progress is enough to combine economic growth and protecting life. And there are many businesses which are hoping to have a net carbon trajectory by 2050. Is that enough? What is going to be the role of the state in terms of funding, as we saw with different reports which have shown that the path ahead is very steep? And what is the role of citizens? Should each and every one of us curb our desires? Should we become frugal? And how can we do this in a context where there is strong demand for purchasing power and public services, and very strong social stress and tension? So our panel is going to answer all of these questions, providing all of the solutions. Well, thank you very much for having described what's at stake here. Yes, you've reminded us that capitalism is the driver, and that is the subject of desire. There's been an accumulation. So how do we deal with this drive? I don't know if we can replace it with something else. There are many constraints which are growing in strength, such as carbon emissions. And who defines what these new constraints are, what the new rules are? Do we move towards decarbonated growth? Who's going to tell us? Who's going to fix these new rules? And to invest all of this money that we've been talking about, well, who's going to pay? Who's going to change the rules of capitalism? We're going to talk about all of this. We're going to start by dividing our debate into two parts, so that all participants can be involved. We're going to give everyone a couple of minutes. And then who fixes the rules? Is it the states, communities, businesses? We're talking about decarbonization. Is it the businesses who are leading the field there? For 1 or 2 years now, businesses have changed their business models through opportunism, but also perhaps conviction in terms of decarbonization. So who, Estelle Bachenloff, do we need to change the rules, and who fixes those rules? Well, you've talked about eco-anxiety. So when we see that we need to be very simple to try and find a solution, well, I'm convinced that we all have this feeling that there is no solution, so that awareness is here. And every time I see youngsters or those who are less young, they say, so what? What can I do as a simple citizen or as an employee in a company and as a voter? And there is a path. There is a pathway. There are many hurdles along the way. It's a combination of things. It's very complicated. You need frugality, you need solutions, innovations in technology. You need all of these things at the same time. We do have solutions to decarbonize and to depollute and to regenerate resources. And so for me, the challenge is how do we manage to bring together that social desire, political will, and the technological offering and that exists. And how do we combine all of this? Who lays down the law? Well, I think everybody has to roll up their sleeves and get down to that. And rather than just addressing the question of the rules, we should be acting. I think we need to act now with solutions that exist now, and we need to speed up. Are things going fast enough? Or are we in a race against the clock towards decarbonisation because the technology exists? Well, we usually say that half of the solutions already exist. We have to invent the other half, so we need innovation. There are two ways of seeing things. Either we wait for that second half of the solutions to be ready, which is what some are doing, or we could say we've got half of the solutions already, so we would be better off speeding things up with what we have. And this is on a regional scale. This is the second of my convictions. It's bottom up. It starts off in the regions. It starts with coalitions, of people with different interests and points of view. Well, Jean-Pierre Clamadieu. Well, yes, I agree with what Estelle concluded about action, but I've got another couple of conclusions to put in there. So, of the past 3 years, we've been going through some amazing crises that have taken us all by surprise. There's the health crisis. There's that war. There's a lot of destruction in our supply chains, including the energy supply chain. There's a lot of chaos. Businesses have reorganize themselves amazingly to cope with all that. I'm really struck by what's happening in France with our clients, our partners, and I think there's an ability to dream up solutions, which is just a source of inspiration. Who could have imagined that we could use that 96% of our employees would work from home in a matter of hours and change all of that? These are things which we can do, and we really have to take a look at new challenges, climate change, and other urgent issues that are around us. I'm full of hope and trust and confidence in businesses' ability to provide a whole palette of solutions. Let's not hide behind governments and all kinds of organizations. No, let's simply shoulder our own responsibility. Yes, we do need a framework, we need goals, and that is the responsibility of politicians nationally, but also increasingly in Europe for subjects that we're talking about today. Yes, I believe that businesses of all sizes have to shoulder their responsibility. They often have the resources, or they can access those resources, governance, technology, flexibility, which will enable them to contribute solutions. So when you see this title of our session, Making the World Desirable, it's kind of a distant, far-off goal, or that's the way I interpreted it. But I think that, on the contrary, we need to bring it closer into concrete terms and in everyday action. So what is desirable? It's the fact of coming to work for us being a collective term. And when you are fortunate enough to work for ENGIE, a group that exists for the energy transition, we can attract talents. We can say to them, in the future, you are going to help us to solve a whole range of problems in big urban conglomerations, by inventing new energy systems, having new approaches such as with hydrogen. And I think it's thanks to this being present in action that we will be able to motivate our colleagues and also perhaps our clients. ENGIE has several million clients in France. And this subject of commitment is so important in my eyes. I think commitment to serving projects and transitions. And I think that must be our joint goal as business leaders, to show the collective usefulness of the projects that we are deploying and the actions that we carry out. So perhaps rather than making the world desirable, I think it's a question of making sure that here and now we offer our colleagues and our clients an opportunity to act, to cope with all of the problems that the planet is facing. Yeah, many initiatives have been talked about here, but there's one taboo, in fact, and that's money. No one's been talking about money. Who is going to pay? The cost is going to be colossal. One contribution said that 67 billion euros per year for many years. There's a banker, Eric Lombard, is with us. He is the bank manager of transition. He knows a lot about finance. I know that you have been wondering about the sustainability of finance for the transition. Do we have the money? Can we keep our model, our capitalistic model, running with this return rate as it is today? Well, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I'm representing the Caisse des Dépôts, and I think the question here of money and funding and financing is not really a question, but as you said in the introduction, who fixes the rules? It will only work if the market economy rules are modified in depth. Let me explain my reasoning behind this. It's very simple. Jean Pisani's report is, I think, the first major report drawn by some macroeconomists, so very serious professional people. They give us a framework for thought, and they say in the next 5 years we have to invest 300 billion euros just in France. So why this sum? Because ecological transformation is necessary. If the world is to be not only desirable but can survive, and in that way it can remain desirable, it means that we have to change all of the way we operate and produce. Let me give you an example. You may not know, Jean-Pierre Clamadier knows, but renewable energies today are developed mainly by local councils. I was in the Loiret with a regional prefect there, and we were talking about solar panels there. So we are co-shareholders in several regions in France of major companies. And in public transport, all of the regional trains are going to be developed. I'm not going to give you every single example because there are many of them. These investments and these 300 billion that Pisani was talking about in his result, the funds exist. The question is, is that money available? Who's going to manage it and who's going to borrow it? So it's an amazing question here. So part of it will go through the local councils. I'm convinced that local councils, at a time when the state has no more room for manoeuvre, the local councils are an option. They can take out debt, and that's why I've mentioned certain regions in France which are working on renewable energies. Mobility, this is of interest to the regions. Social housing, of course, is going to involve local players, and heating in apartments, etc. Same thing. So I think state debt is a very big question, but we've got traditions here. And the rest, as Estelle and Jean-Pierre have mentioned this, is down to businesses. Businesses are going to have to revolutionize their production processes, repatriate factories so that we have low-carbon factories in France, and that will require massive funds. And this transition has two consequences. First of all, some of that investment rather, is not going to be very profitable. It's necessary. This morning we heard from the boss of Solvec, who said that she transformed one of her factories and that costed a lot of money but is not giving any return on that investment yet. And so there's a second consequence which is even more important, and that is that ecological transformation is going to cost a lot to individuals, and it's going to cost a lot to those people who have very small incomes. They're going to have to insulate their homes, they're going to change their car, they're going to have to change their way of consumption. It's going to cost them more to buy their food. So that this ecological transformation can take place, businesses are going to have to invest in non-profitable projects, but we're going to have to help the purchasing power of those people with the smallest revenue. The only way of balancing the system in a market economy, if we want to invest, which is not going to be very profitable but necessary, and increase employees' purchasing power, is mean that we have to agree to bring down the cost of capital and make sure that our market economy has a smaller profitability rate. I would add, all roundtables have said this. One of the problems that we face today is the increase in the inequality of our different estates and our wealth. There's inequality of revenue, but however, the inequalities of our wealth is being reinforced. Well, we'll take a look at that later on. We'll see whether the profitability of capital can be reduced. We'll ask your shareholders for that. Yes, you mentioned Solvay's project. This is something which Veolia carried out for Solvay. We are replacing coal with waste, 70% carbon. There is a business model which goes with it, so it's profitable. Okay. Florent Menegaux. Now, when we were preparing this roundtable together, I was surprised by your unfailing optimism. You said that you believe in humanity. We've always come through, and we will manage once again this time. So for your employees, you're going to offer a collective rave. Well, the question of making the world desirable is like a functional question. However, it depends on what your view is of the world. In reality, in 2023, is the situation worse than it was in 1943? In 1943, this situation wasn't particularly rosy. We were all in a world war. We were in a terrible situation. Humanity was in danger. Since then, we've created a lot of wealth. We have brought millions of people out of poverty. We have had some wonderful technological development, which means that we can progress. And here we are at the heart of innovation. Innovation, it means saying what's true today is because we have a certain standpoint, and if we were to take a different standpoint, we would see things differently. So the questions which are on the table today are huge challenges, of course. But from my point of view, this is something we can do. Michelin feels that this is something we can do. Estelle, Jean-Pierre, you've said certain things. We can see amazing solutions which are going to come onto the markets in 5, 10, 15 years. And of course, when you take a look at the world today, you wonder, well, without those things, how can you understand that things are going to get better? So the question of financing is a true issue, naturally. And the question of sharing out value and wealth is a true topic for society. And it goes beyond simply France. It is at the very heart of all debates. If we have transition which is only possible for the rich, well, that means there's going to be a huge problem ahead of us. And in the past, we have managed to get millions of people out of extreme poverty in the world. Today, 9% of the population is extremely poor, where it was 40% just a few decades ago. So we have made huge progress. Now, of course, there are 5 billion people on the earth who live with less than $5 a day. That is an issue, of course. And behind that, we have to be able to offer not only something which will enable those who live comfortably to consume less energy and to have a smaller impact, but also to enable those who own less wealth to access more wealth.
Comment on fait ça?
So the question is, how do we manage to reach that goal? Well, innovation generates new regulation, but new regulation generates innovation. So in reality, both go hand in hand together. And depending on which started, when there's an innovation coming up, then we need regulation for the innovation to reach the markets. And then regulation triggers among the companies an idea and says, how are we going to respond to this? And that generates an innovation capacity. And we've seen it when we went through crisis. We endured crisis, and that were very deep, very serious. And globally, it was chaotic, but we managed to get out of it and to rise to the challenge. And we're stronger now. Well, as to the general pessimism, something that is quite striking is the notion of progress. 60% of people that were questioned thought that progress is negative, because we think that technological progress is negative because it involves more consumption and so on and so forth. But if we were all having Michelin tires, yes, well, today, to drive kilometers, we consume 1.4 million kilometers a year. But if we were to have Michelin tires, we would need 250 million tires less without changing anything, with more profit and less accidents. So progress is all about this. We need regulation for innovation to have a positive impact and to access the markets. So when we talk about a leveling playing field, this is what we're talking about, the rules of the game, basically. When I talk about the distribution between the value between capital and labor, well, the market economy has shown its great efficiency, and we're going back to the regulation mechanisms that enable to redistribute part of the wealth, which must be governed by the public authorities. So, because it's not the private sector, up to the private sector to decide this, and a company keeps on risking things, seeing what works, what doesn't work. This is what they do permanently. Thank you. We are now with the Mayor of Florence, Dario Nardella. So, indeed, we're thinking about, he's thinking about the community of his city, the regulation, and the acceptability by the population of the rules that you set out. You're a bit for a front runner. You want to reach a carbon-free society 10 years before the others. Well, before everything, I think we have to think about today's concept. Making choices is the leitmotif of today. If we want to have a desirable world, we need to have a world that is capable of making choices. And to make choices, we need to make decisions, to own our responsibility. And to make decisions, we need to embark the citizens on board, to involve them, local authorities as well. This is my experience as the mayor and the president of the European Mayor Society. Governmental authorities are not capable today of making clear-cut and straightforward decisions. What do they do? What do states do? What did they do during the COP27? What kind of decisions were made? What choices were made for the during the COP26, during COP25 and COP24? We have no national government capable of making decisions. We need to change the model, the government model. A multi-level government model is essential to have the strength and the capacity to make decisions, but also to involve the citizens. This is why I think, and I think the European mayors are also convinced, that the cities are very important to change the world in the way we make decisions. Why? Why cities in Europe? Why are they the problem, but also the solution? We should remind you of a figure. 80% of the world population is concentrated in 3% of the territory, which is the urban territory. But if we look at Europe, we see that European cities are consuming 80% of the available energy. They produce 80% of the waste and 80% of the gas, of carbon gas. However, cities at the same time are drivers for solutions because they can mobilize citizens around new participation approaches. And to have an active participation from citizens, we need to mobilize energy on education, participation, cooperation from citizens. And the problem that we see, that we have in front of us, is the society cost in terms of energy transition and climate transition. We always talk about energy transition, climate transition, but never do we talk about societal transition, namely an equitable transition. Our citizens are very much concerned by this cost for the society. If we want to oblige citizens to change their car, to have an electric car, to have a non-polluting car, if we want to change our heating system in the private households for families, and we have the inflation rate problem, we have salary problems. So the citizens cannot be involved with us and cannot rise to the challenge with us, alongside with us. So the matter at hand is the following. We should work all together, hand in hand, with the public powers. It's not the central power. It's not the only power. We have also local powers with the stakeholders, the private stakeholders, to share objectives that would be sustainable objectives. And we need to think out of the European box and think together. We need to have this capacity. If we do not have the capacity to build a new instrument together, a new decision-making instrument, we won't be able to make choices. And without choices, we won't have a desirable world. Maybe some follow-up reactions on what you've just said. When you talked about the change of the capitalist world, you wanted to react. Well, the Caisse des Dépôts is an important shareholder of ENGIE, so I guess the discussions to come will definitely be different. But I wanted to say that the capitalist system is very plastic, it's very agile. It has shown its capacity to allocate investments at in the right slots. We can see that the business model that is ours is different in terms of energy. And we manage to fund and finance projects. Why? Because the profitability is low, but we have a visibility over a long-term horizon. This is why we justify investments. And we manage to have partnerships with people who have a different vision to have financeable projects. And a second comment, the relationship that we have with our shareholders is not only centered around financial bottom lines, but over non-financial results as well. It's very important, including and above all with investors like the Caisse des Dépôts, but not the only one. And that's a time when we can discuss about what we're doing. Decarbonation of ENGIE is important, and it feeds our discussions. And people say, okay, you're not doing enough. What would be the prerequisites to do more? And they could say, okay, beware of the impact that it could have on your performance. But our discussion is very lively. And it's a form of hope for the future, because the financial system is looking for adjustments to a reality that is different today. And shareholders expect from us as stakeholders and those that have a say in the energy transition to have a contribution not only in the bottom line, but via a wide array of KPIs. You are used to dealing with these contradictions because you have a family tradition, but we also have shareholders at the stock exchange, and they rather have a short-term vision. How do you manage to strike the right balance between both? Well, indeed, we have a dilemma. All company managers have the same problem. What should we do between the short, mid, and long term? Some are there for the long term, and they are the ones that manage to juggle between the survival of the short-term vision, the capacity to do things in the mid-term, and to develop and ensure long-term implementation. So for this ecological transition, companies will find the business model. The society will end up finding the right business model. Every time that we develop a new technology, at first it's a disaster. It's a financial disaster. It doesn't work. We don't have the scalability, but slowly but surely, if we manage to see that there are markets that are interested and the technology can be fine-tuned and improved, then we have an S-curve, and we manage to see that things that are collapsing, and then it goes up again until a peak and a plateau. And in companies, we manage a lot of S-shaped curves. As for the energy transitions, it's another subject, but I'm sure and confident that we are at the beginning. And of course, it frightens us. But when we see technologies that date back to 20 years ago, we thought that it would never work. But progressively, we managed to see that it worked. So when it's sustainable, we actually have a portfolio of subjects, short-term, mid-term, and long-term subjects, and they juggle between all of them to strike the right balance. And we have to manage to compensate shareholders rightfully, but if you do it at a detriment of employees, it won't work. If you compensate salaries too much at the detriment of shareholders, it won't work either, because nobody will invest in your company. So we always have to make both ends meet everywhere. Well, how can we get into this system of capitalism, but also we need also to be held accountable towards our customers? How do we manage to combine all these components? Well, I would like to to follow up on what was said. Let's not forget the human being. It's not the planet on the one hand, the technology that will save us, and let's not forget why we do this. It's for the human being, it's for the salaried employees, it's for the cities. This is why we decarbonate. And let's not forget why we're doing this. Why am I saying this? Because when I talk about salaried employees, the first duty of a company is to have a mini society, to weave a relationship between the different individuals. And we've seen in the past that it's even more important than it used to be in the past. As the CEO, the first thing that I did is to have minimal social requirements for all the Veolia employees. That's one of the examples. We lead by example, and this is how I act, more than with injunctions. This is how we're gonna change and give a facelift to our society. All the French people, but it's also the case everywhere in the world, we're all ready to make efforts, but provided some conditions are met. First of all, we need to have equality in terms of efforts. Everyone should work, and it should not be just a small thing that is nice but without any efficiency, and it should not impact their health. To have a desirable world, we need everyone to be healthy, to live better, and not only with more quantity, but we need to have better quality. When we talk about human beings, this is essential to build such a world. Thank you. I like this S-shaped curve from Laurent Mélonneau and this reference to 1943, because we have to measure collectively the scope of the challenge ahead of us. The objective is to have a threshold of 1.5 degrees in 2100, and for this we need to be carbon-free by 2050. And for this, we have 10 years to implement all the necessary investments. We need to have collective endeavors. Nobody should be left on the side. Everybody should be included by all the citizens. And this requires massive involvement, and this will change everything. When you refer to 1943, we have made huge efforts at the end of World War II in what we call the Trente Glorieuses. And the social pact that defined the Trente Glorieuses, the 30 years after World War II, and you've read it in the history book, certainly you've forgotten it, but it's a social pact whereby there would be a distribution that is much different from what we have today. There's a lot of purchasing power distribution where investors privilege the long-term vision rather than the short-term. The managers were not compensated the way they are now, even though it's not essential. So we have the capacity to do it, but we need to do it by changing the rules in a deep way. And it has been said already before, we need a better monitoring of the way companies and board of directors and states work on everything that is non-financial. And there's a European directive that will compel everyone to disclose information on financial information. That's an important KPI. But we will also have extra financial monitoring. To give you an example, at the Caisse de Dépôt, it's 1,168 found situations where each year we will be held accountable, where we will have to report. And that's important to disclose information on the financial results, but also on the impact that we have on the planet. And all these subjects are very important. And I will wrap up by saying that the financiers, the investors, have a major role to play. There's an international alliance of investors, insurance companies, asset managers that was created, that was formed. And with some of our public and private partners, we have a dialogue with the Secretary General of the United Nations that considered that to save the planet, which is also its role, we need all investors of the world to respect these criteria. And they said that investors have an important role to play. Shareholders, investors have a role to play in the way that the money will be channeled towards the protection of the planet, which is indispensable for our society. So it's important to involve everyone, employees, but also the new generation. The survey was carried out as well as to the inspirations of the young graduates, may it be in the political science world or the food industry world. Should we rally also the young generation? What do you think about it? There are several considerations, the first of which is that the young generation has a lot of anxiety. There's a central point. For the moment, we are much fear-focused and we try to be proactive, but we shouldn't have wrath, anger as well, because we have a lot of experiments with an economist from Harvard, Stephen Sunshine, because we should keep a relationship between emotion and acceptability of public policies. When we are going through a climate crisis or a political crisis, when people are afraid, they are getting ready to get information, but when they are angry, they don't listen to information anymore. They just hate everything and challenge everything. So we don't have a lot of time ahead of us before we are reaching this tipping point. With the young generation, it is for sure that in 2-3 years we've had a strong movement. For a long time we would show them only, we would raise awareness with the scientific facts. Now they know much more than we do. And they want to have solutions. When we talk about the fresco of climate or the autumn workshop, they reject it anyway. They want solutions. And then we carried out surveys with the young from the business management schools. And we would offer them some solutions and saying, maybe you can find a job where you would earn 20K less, but the company will be more ecologically responsible. Would you opt for that type of company? So we're talking less about morality here. And what is the answer? Well, they're willing to have 15% discount in their salary, so to say, to have a better responsible company. But, you know, the young generation is diversified. We have several youth segments. When we talk about business management schools, we see them HEC, X, and so on. But within these communities, when you have people from business management schools, when they have to pay for their studies rather than parents paying for it, then we have a different view, a different perspective. But you have also vocational school students where they have a perspective that is different on society. So making both ends meet on the one hand and saving the planet on the other hand. Yeah. So we should not focus too much on this youth. We should also understand the underprivileged youth, where the issues at hand are much more complex. Indeed, these issues are not always solved, and sometimes an answer is not found to these issues. So you also are facing thousands of talents every day, every year. What is going to happen in 10 years, in 20 years? And the planners is part of the issues to tackle. what are you talking about with your employees on that subject? Well, we're very lucky because we're very attractive at Veolia for these young graduates because of the work we do, but because also of the consistency in which we're having our operations. We're not perfect, but we try to improve on a daily basis. We understand and we manage to be true to our words and to walk the talk, basically. So sometimes when we talk about the youth, what are we talking about? All the studies that we carried out show that the youth is not less interested by energy transition than the older age groups. But then there's something about the under 18 age group that is the younger people. And we have to mobilize the young people, but not only the young people. And where I would like to follow up on what you have said, they want evidence. They don't just want empty words. They want something concrete. So a desirable, yes. A desirable world, yes. They want to find in the world that we're building enticing, where they don't want prohibitions. They want to have something that is desirable, but it needs to be possible. We shouldn't just make them dream. We should show them the way. They want to build together with us. We should co-build the path towards solutions, technological society, but also frugality. When we talk about frugality, they talk about sufficiency, which is not uninteresting. How much do I really need, and not more, to produce the same outcome? I think that the term is quite more interesting, actually. So as far as I'm concerned, ecological transformation is not something that we rule. We need to do it, and we need to do it now.
So when we look at the track record of an energy company which specializes in gas, how can we dream? Well, I think we have to explain in concrete terms that energy wants to be the leader in climate transition, energy transition. And so that there are some very obvious things. 5 to 6 billion euros invested every year in renewables. 5 or 6 billion is a substantial amount of money. And to show colleagues who work with us in gas, and we all need gas, we're all very, very happy when we need to turn our heating on, that the teams are all out there and can provide the energy that we all need. This gas, well, we want to make it greener. And this is something which is very motivating for our teams. We've got hundreds and hundreds, soon thousands of collection points of biogases. We've got methanizers, which you can see out in the countryside, which are going to inject into our network locally produced gas from waste. And in a business which is kind of substantial in size, hundreds of thousands of employees today, it's important to understand how each individual contributes to the collective goal, and that means a lot of communication by management, intermediary levels, the top management as well. They need to inspire and they need to show that we are being active, and the fact of being active is so important. I think today we know how urgent the situation is. There's lots of analyses been carried out. Situations are being developed. They do exist. We have to manage to speed things up. And we will speed up by motivating all of our teams and showing each individual what their contribution is. Our employees are challenging us on these themes, and they're right to do so. They drive us to go faster. Eric Lombard, you are in the center of all of this country that is going through transformation. You've got local councils, you've got your employees. The stakeholders for you need to be perhaps convinced of this. No, they are convinced, and we are managing to recruit people to the Caisse and to our subsidiaries. The payment is perhaps lower than in the private sector, because there's a question. I just want to give an example here, which I found very, very enlightening, and it enables me to say a couple of words about policies in towns. So we've got this town policy, the city policies, which we've been talking about recently. In this policy, there's a development over recent years, i.e. to foster collective living, apartment blocks, etc. These are social housing associations. There are 700 or less, I think, now in France, but it's all very centralized whilst being local. So co-owned properties are areas, and the actual minister used to be the mayor of Clichy in the Paris region, where things didn't go so very well. When people didn't have enough money to pay the rent, then the whole thing crumbled. We saw that in Marseille most recently. So we had an initiative to renovate these co-owned properties that were not up to scratch. We asked for help from the police, etc., when there are these property owners who would profit from the underprivileged. In Marseille, for example, there was an area called Parc Chanou. There we created a business plan. It was presented in my office. We don't have stakeholders, but we have to all the same have to be profitable in order to survive and to grow. And when I was presented with this project, the subject was making a loss, and we realized that we had to get back into equilibrium. But they're saying, you know, it's so important. So we can see how questions of meaning are drivers. They're very motivational, and they mean that we can get youngsters on board. And I just want to say, in our country, we have a lot of elected representatives because for the general good, they are night and day out in the field with their electors, and even more so in recent days. And I just want to say a few words because city policies are very contested today. If we say things simply, since Jean-Louis Borloo launched his plan, there have been ups and downs, of course. There are some sections which have been renovated a lot. There's a lot of work being carried out to provide more public services, to help entrepreneurship in the different neighborhoods, and it's all moving forward. Let's not be defeatist here. It's all advancing. However, what is actually happening? Well, because it works, there are many people who are advancing, who know how to make their way up the ladder. They leave their neighborhood, they are replaced. Because we have a lot of migrants and immigrants coming into France, they are replaced by new arrivals who they themselves may be in even more difficult situations. And so the social standing isn't really changing very much. And that is what we're experiencing now, but it's not a failure. We have to continue to work to enhance housing and services, etc. We've noted also that whilst it's difficult to manage towns and cities, the tensions that do exist, particularly among the young, who are angry, then sometimes it can spill over. I'm not saying this to apologize, to make apologies for their actions, but I think that our town and city policies do have some positive effects, and these policies do work. They do what they were designed to do. So we've been talking about Michelin's aims earlier on, Florent Menegaux. Well, if you offer people a transaction, you do a job and I'll pay you a salary, well, that's not enough anymore. To motivate a group of people, a business has to be a social platform. These are individuals who are working together. Nobody's forcing them to come to your company. So when you want to motivate them, and I echo what I said earlier on, you have to enable them to look forward to the future, towards this collective dream. At Michelin, we've got our collective dream, not rave as the interpreter said earlier on, but a collective dream. That's what gets us all active and makes us able to make choices. We can become active, and then there's so much coherency in our action to fine-tune or to align up our actions with our concepts. So we don't have any problem with attractiveness. We can attract people, we can keep employees as well, because each individual is born to progress. And when you offer them a framework that enables them to express and deploy their talents, well, quite naturally, that person will go and do what they were born to do. Earlier on, you mentioned that disbalance between remuneration for the work of capital. Have we shifted? Have we gone too far? Yeah, I do want to say I agree with what Estelle said. It's not a minimum wage which we're talking about here in other countries. We have defined minimum social contributions around the world, because there are some countries where there's no social aid. If there's a death, your family is left with nothing. And so we had to balance things out again. And in our contract, we say we have to balance between the remuneration of the smallest wages and the highest wages. Everybody has to have a minimum amount of social protection. And a decent wage is not just a survival wage. A wage, we've defined it with, for example, two parents, 2 children. A salary must enable each member of that family to be able to save, to have housing, to eat. to go on holiday, to access culture, a minimum amount of things. And we did it not by saying that we're defining all this. We used NGOs who are specialised in this to define what the minimum is. And since we've done that, of course, the commitment rate of people at Michelin, when you take them away from this survival mode and put them in this new mode, well, of course, yes, they're there. They're happy to come to work because they know that this finance which goes alongside work, that contract is completed and respected. So mayors play an important role, of course, for social cohesion. We see that. We've seen that in France in recent days, and we can see how things can become out of order. Yes, French mayors are committed in this very difficult social situation here in France, but the same all over in Europe. And talking about the new generations, I think, as you've already said, that the new generations are more sensitive to these major global challenges. There's climate change, social inclusion, social inequalities, all of the problems which we've underlined here. But this generation is also very vulnerable, very fragile. And if you need to start a dialogue with these youngsters. You need to listen to them. We need to talk to the young generations. If you don't do that, the risk will be that this social vulnerability will change into social anger. Most of these social demonstrations that we're seeing here in France and in other European countries, all of these demonstrations mainly have their roots in the new generations. In Italy, I carried out some research into post-pandemic generations and their needs and the expectations of young Italians in the period after COVID. And this was a questionnaire which was carried out, a survey which was carried out. And I was very interested to note in this research that youngsters remain heavily impacted by the healthcare crisis, which continues around the world due to COVID. And this report talks about youngsters who, between the ages of 17 and 36, they highlighted the fragility and the vulnerability of children and young adults who, in the first months of 2021, saw a radical change in their lifestyles, in their professional outlook and their social relations. That's compared to the desirable world. The desirable world for the younger generations is, sadly, a world with a lot of problems. I think, once again, collaboration at national and local levels to talk to the new generation is absolutely key. I want to tell you a story. You may have heard it before, but last April in Florence, just by chance, I was on Piazza della Signoria. It's before the Bishop's Palace there, where my office is. And it's not where I live, sadly, but it's where my office is, and that's not such a shoddy place. So you're all very welcome to come and visit me in my office. So there was a demonstration of ecologists, the European last generation movement. It was like Friday for the Future. And there were boys who threw paint onto the walls of the Bishop's Palace. I was there by chance. And so I started to prevent the youngsters from doing that. And I became very famous in Italy because of that. Because I was speaking the previous week with the youngsters, I was saying to them, you must not stain culture to heighten awareness of civil society about questions of climate urgent problems. We, public administrators, we, politicians, must find situations to talk with the new generation in Europe, because they represent this social anger. And we have to invest a lot of energy to avoid that this social vulnerability transforms into something which is quite serious for our society. Thank you very much. Yes, we need all of the talents of Yann Allégrand to sum all of that up in just a matter of minutes. Well, sadly, we haven't got time to take questions, but that being said, we had a very rich debate here. And it really does sketch out solutions. It shows that there's a lot of action already underway in businesses. Starting by the Caisse des Dépôts, we have shown the extent to which the acceptability of projects is so key for projects to succeed. We need businesses, private individuals, and everyone to be involved, including the young generation. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. And thank you.